I was halfway through my third cup of coffee, stirring it too slowly, watching the foam settle, when the bell above the door jangled twice. Midnight on a Wednesday. Not unusual for this neighborhood. Night shift, drunk students, someone who can't sleep. But it caught my attention anyway. Two women stepped in, arms full of oversized coats, hair a little mussed from the wind. One smiled at the barista, the other glanced around, hesitating like she wasn't sure if she should have come. My eyes drifted toward them automatically, probably more out of habit than anything else. I'd been alone most evenings lately, the kind of quiet that leaves you noticing small movements in a crowded room, the way someone folds their scarf, the way their fingers brush the rim of a cup, the way a jacket slides off one shoulder in a careless way that somehow looks deliberate. The younger one, early 20s I guessed, nodded at the counter, ordering 2 coffees, plain, no sugar. The older woman hesitated for a moment, then murmured something I didn't catch. She laughed softly when the barista clarified, a dry little sound that made me smile without meaning to. I caught myself remembering the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Something about the gesture, it wasn't flirtatious, not exactly, but it made the space between us seem smaller. I checked my phone. Nothing new. No messages. A half-written text to my friend sat there, unsent, blinking. I stirred my coffee again, slower this time, just to give myself something to do. My thoughts drifted toward the sound of her laughter, the casual tilt of her head, the way she didn't seem to notice me watching. And yet, somehow, I wanted her to. Do you come here often? The words were out before I could stop them, awkward, fumbling. She glanced at me, slightly startled, slightly amused. Not really, she said, then paused, as if reconsidering. But it seems like a good time for coffee, doesn't it? I nodded, because what else could you do? I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her smile again, but the silence stretched instead. And then, just as I was about to turn back to my cup, our hands brushed briefly over the counter. I noticed the quick flick of her eyes toward her fingers, a small, fleeting acknowledgement that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. We ended up on the same small table, not because we planned it, but because the shop was quiet, and the barista gave us a sympathetic look. Conversation started in fragments, half questions, pauses, tiny jokes neither of us quite finished. I found myself watching the way she folded her napkin, like she was trying to keep herself busy, and I realized I was doing the same. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time has a funny way of stretching when someone unfamiliar feels like they've always belonged. She said something about her late shift, the other woman's voice soft in agreement, and I nodded along, listening more than speaking. By the time they got up to leave, I had memorized the curve of her smile, the slight crease in her forehead when she concentrated, the warmth that lingered even after she stepped into the chill outside. She lingered at the door. Our eyes met. See you around? She said. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. She tilted her head, like she was waiting. And then her phone buzzed, someone else, probably. She glanced at it, frowned, and whispered, "Actually, maybe later." She left, but her words hung in the air, unfinished, like an invitation I didn't yet know how to accept. I stared at the door long after it clicked shut, the heat of my coffee forgotten. And just as I was about to take another sip, my phone lit up with a message. "Can you come back downstairs?" I hadn't even sent a text, but somehow, I knew exactly who it was. The hallway was warmer than the street, though it didn't do much to settle the flutter in my chest. She was leaning against the railing, arms crossed, scrolling through her phone like she wasn't waiting for me. "I didn't expect anyone to come back," she said without looking up. Her voice was softer now, quieter than in the cafe. I got your message," I said. My words felt clumsy, like they were trying to carry more meaning than they could hold. She finally met my eyes. Something unspoken passed between us. A hesitation, a curiosity, a line neither of us wanted to cross but both were inching toward. "Sometimes I just can't sleep," she admitted. "It's easier to come here than lie in bed staring at the ceiling." Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. Even if it's just for coffee at midnight. I nodded, trying to keep my hands still. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would make her feel less alone, but all I did was flick my eyes to her fingers twisting the strap of her bag. I get that, I said finally. I'm usually up too late. Not for coffee, though. Just thinking. The silence settled around us like a blanket. It wasn't heavy, but it wasn't empty either. I imagined all the things I wasn't supposed to, how this could never be simple. Age, life experience, the faint hum of the world outside reminding me this was probably temporary. And yet, here we were, hovering in a space that felt impossibly private. She gestured toward the small kitchen nook. Do you want some tea? I just boiled water. I followed her inside, fumbling with the mug. She poured for both of us, her hands steady, careful. I noticed how the light caught the silver of her ring, how her sleeves slid up slightly when she lifted the kettle. Tiny, ordinary things, but right then, they felt like markers on a map I didn't know how to read. We drank in silence at first. The clink of the spoon against the mug, the steam curling into the air. She glanced at me, her expression softening. I used to make tea like this for my kids, mornings before school. Now it's just me. I caught a flicker of something, nostalgia, loneliness, maybe regret. I wanted to say something reassuring, but all I managed was, "It smells nice." She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and for a moment I thought she might reach for my hand. Instead, she set her mug down, brushing the back of her fingers against mine as she passed. It was brief, unintentional, maybe accidental. But it made me aware of the warmth, the possibility, the quiet ache of wanting something complicated. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, I thought, watching her step back to the counter. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And in the flicker of that shared glance, the world outside, responsibilities, age, reason, didn't exist for just a heartbeat. I woke before her the next morning, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the heater. Sunlight slanted weakly through the blinds. She was already in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she poured coffee. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her, aware of how ordinary the motion was, the tilt of her head, the careful pour, the slight crease between her brows, and yet how intimate it felt. "Morning," I said, but my voice sounded foreign in the empty room. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "You sleepin' late?" "Couldn't really sleep." I moved toward the counter, trying to act casual. My hands fiddled with the rim of my mug. She nodded, eyes flicking away. Something in the air shifted, tension, hesitation, a boundary I wasn't sure I was allowed to cross. I wanted to reach for her, to brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear, but my fingers froze mid-air. She set her mug down and turned back straight, hands clasped in front of her. I noticed the way her shoulders stiffened, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough. The phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowning, and muttered something under her breath. A friend's text, maybe? Work. Something urgent. She stepped back, retreating from the space we had carved out the night before. I wanted to ask her to stay, to ignore it, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I traced patterns on the counter with my fingertips, pretending to organize sugar packets, counting silently so I wouldn't reach out. "Are you busy today?" I asked finally. My voice trailed, unsure. She shook her head. "Not really. Errands." She hesitated, then added, "Maybe later." I nodded, swallowing. My chest felt tight. We circled each other in silence, like planets avoiding collision. Every glance, every subtle shift in stance, became a conversation of its own. At one point, she bent to pick up a stray napkin. Our hands brushed again, this time lingering a heartbeat longer. My pulse jumped, and I wanted to say something, anything, but she straightened quickly, eyes averted, leaving the moment suspended between us. "Careful," I muttered, not sure why. She said, a small, noncommittal sound. Then she smiled, just a fraction, fleeting. I imagined leaning closer, seeing if the smile would reach her eyes. feeling the warmth of her shoulder against mine. I wanted to. Needed to. But I didn't. Not yet. Something, timing, reason, fear, held me back. She picked up her mug again, the motion casual, everyday, yet somehow charged. My gaze lingered on the curve of her hand, the tilt of her jaw as she lifted it. We were in the same room, close enough to speak without moving, and yet the distance felt infinite. I thought, almost out loud, I shouldn't, maybe, but the sentence trailed off, unfinished. She looked at me, and for a moment, I swear I saw the same hesitation mirrored in her eyes, a silent question neither of us dared to voice. And in that pause, the space between us felt like it could collapse at any second. A near kiss, a whispered confession, a crossing that would change everything, but we stayed still, suspended, waiting for a signal either would give. The park was empty except for the distant hum of cars and the occasional rustle of leaves. I walked beside her, hands shoved deep into my pockets, scanning the cracks in the sidewalk like they held the answers I couldn't speak. She kept her scarf wrapped tight around her neck, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed somewhere far away. "Do you ever regret things?" I asked, almost to myself, voice low enough that I could pretend I wasn't asking her. She glanced at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Then she looked away again. "Sometimes," she said, slow, careful. "But mostly, I just think about what I could have done differently." Her lips pressed together. "Small things. Big things." I nodded, though my stomach tightened. I wanted to reach for her hand, to steady her, or maybe myself, but I didn't. Every instinct told me to stay back. A pigeon flitted past, startling both of us. I laughed, quietly, awkwardly, and she smiled in return, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was thinking, or remembering, or holding something back. I don't know why I'm telling you this," she murmured, voice softer now, closer, like she was letting a wall slip. "It's not really safe to talk about. Not with anyone." She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Maybe I shouldn't even." I swallowed, feeling the weight of her words. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her voice, the soft tilt of her head, the way her fingers twisted the edge of her scarf. "You can tell me," I said, almost too quickly. "I mean, if you want." She gave me a long look, unreadable. A faint tension coiled in her jaw, in the set of her shoulders. I thought I saw the shadow of something like fear, or guilt, or maybe both. "I guess," she started, then stopped. Took a breath. "I'm scared of messing things up. Scared of feeling too much." Her voice wavered on the last word, almost breaking. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering at her temple. I wanted to close the space between us, wanted to reach out, wanted to ask her what too much meant, but my own doubts caught me mid-step. Age, reason, everything that said no, everything that whispered about consequences. We walked a few more steps in silence. A leaf spiraled down and landed near her foot. She kicked it gently, then laughed quietly, nervously. I laughed too, though it sounded hollow. Finally, she stopped on a park bench, sitting down and hugging her knees. I crouched beside her, careful to leave a space that didn't feel like retreat. "Are you okay?" I asked, voice softer than I expected. She looked up at me then, eyes glossy, searching. "I don't know," she admitted. Pause. "Do you want this to be more than it is?" Her question hung in the air, fragile, dangerous, unspoken in a dozen ways more than words. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. There was a moment, just a heartbeat, where we could have crossed the line. Where everything became real. And then the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of a car, a reminder that the world outside this bench still existed. Her eyes lingered on mine, waiting. I swallowed. The question remained. She didn't answer my texts that week. Not the short, casual ones, not the ones where I tried to be funny, not even the ones that just asked if she was okay. I stared at my phone more times than I cared to admit, thumb hovering over her name, then letting it slide back to the home screen. When I walked past the coffee shop, she wasn't there. Not at midnight, not at morning rush, not anywhere that seemed like her. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, the way she leaned against the counter, laughed too softly, smiled like it mattered. Then I ran into her on the street, but she looked through me like a window, eyes distant, careful. She smiled faintly, almost polite, and kept walking. A half step, then gone. I spent that night replaying every conversation, every pause, every glance. Did I say too much? Or not enough? I could almost hear the echoes of her voice, the fragments of confession she had let slip on the bench, and now those words felt suspended, unfinished, like a sentence interrupted by a door slamming. The next day, I learned something I hadn't expected. Her ex had come back into town, her kids too, maybe. The edges of her life that I hadn't seen, the responsibilities, the routines, the invisible weight of all the things she carried. I didn't blame her. But suddenly the small world we'd carved out felt like a fragile glass on the edge of a counter. One nudge, and it would shatter. I tried showing up, a little too cautiously, like maybe I could remind her of the small things, coffee at midnight, shared smiles, the bench where we almost admitted everything. But she wasn't there. Maybe she didn't want to be. Maybe she needed space. Maybe it had never been more than a few stolen hours in a world that wouldn't let them last. I found myself sitting at the same table alone, folding a napkin over and over, watching the foam settle in a cup that didn't need drinking. My thoughts kept straying to her, the curve of her shoulder when she picked up the kettle, the flick of her eyes toward her fingers, the weight of what she didn't say. And yet I couldn't reach her. Not really. Not without crossing some invisible line I didn't know how to measure. I wrote a message. Half of it. Then deleted it. Tried again. Paused. Hit delete. It stayed in drafts, unsent, like a fragment of hope I wasn't allowed to act on. The world kept moving. Cars honked, leaves fell, the coffee cooled. I walked past the bench where she'd asked me if I wanted this to be more than it was. Empty. Cold. Waiting. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. And maybe it had. I found her in the kitchen, standing by the sink, hands wrapped around a mug. Steam curled into the dim morning light, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I should move closer or retreat, unsure if I had the right to be there at all. She looked up, startled, then softened, not exactly smiling but present. Not distant. Not elsewhere. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, voice low, almost careful. I had to, I said, though I wasn't sure why. Half of me expected her to tell me I shouldn't have, half hoped she'd step aside, make room for the words that had been stuck between us for weeks. She sipped her tea, eyes drifting to the counter, to the knife resting on the cutting board, to the faint drip of water in the sink. And then, slowly, she met my gaze. You didn't leave a message. I didn't know what to say, I admitted, stepping closer but keeping my hands in my pockets. I didn't want to pressure you. Or make it harder. Her fingers twisted the mug, and I noticed how her knuckles whitened slightly, how her thumb tapped a quiet rhythm against the ceramic. It was confusing. Seeing you, then nothing. I didn't know if it mattered, if this mattered. It does, I said, voice low. And maybe that was all I needed to say. Maybe that was enough. She set the mug down carefully, taking a step closer, but not too close. It's complicated, she murmured. Life, age, everything. I nodded, trying not to flinch at the weight of it. I know. I know it's not simple. For a moment, we just stood there. The coffee shop memories, the midnight walks, the park bench confessions, they were all behind us, all present, all impossible to untangle. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to say more, wanted to promise anything that could keep her from leaving again. But all I did was watch her, breathe in the quiet tension, let the space between us carry meaning. She exhaled, a soft sound, and glanced down at her hands. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand just enough for our fingers to brush. Not a grab. Not a claim. A recognition. A gentle, careful acknowledgement that neither of us needed more words right now. I felt my chest loosen a little. A little weight lifted, a little tension broken. I smiled, small, unspoken. She returned it, a flicker, a quiet acknowledgement, before turning back to her mug. "Okay," she said softly. And in that one word, simple and human, the hours of hesitation, the unsent messages, the near misses and quiet longing, all settled into something fragile but real. Not perfect. Not complete. Just enough. I stayed. Not because I had answers, not because the future was clear, but because in that moment, in that brush of hands and shared silence, it was enough to exist together, quietly, honestly. Weeks passed, or maybe months. It was hard to measure time in moments that felt suspended. She still worked odd hours. I still showed up late to coffee shops I didn't need to visit. But somehow, things settled into a rhythm that didn't feel forced. One morning, 8:47 a.m., I found myself on the park bench where we'd almost crossed the line. The same worn wood, the same cracked pavement, but it didn't feel empty anymore. She came up behind me, carrying 2 mugs, black coffee for me, chamomile for her. She set one down in front of me without a word. I smiled, noticing the faint curve of her lips, the casual tilt of her head. She sat beside me, close enough that our knees brushed, far enough to respect the invisible boundaries we'd agreed upon. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied. The word felt lighter than it should, carrying weeks of half-smiles, near misses, and quiet confessions. We sipped in silence, letting the warmth seep in, letting the world keep turning without demanding we rush. A breeze lifted a few leaves, the sound of distant traffic filled the gaps, and for the first time, the park felt like ours. "I made too much tea," she said, holding up her mug with a faint grin. "You want the rest?" I nodded, reaching for it. Fingers brushed again. No tension, no pause, just ordinary touch, and somehow it felt extraordinary. We talked in fragments, small updates, half-jokes, stories that didn't need a climax. And in between, there were pauses. Pauses where I watched the sunlight catch her hair, where she laughed quietly at something only she found funny, where I felt a steady warmth in my chest that didn't demand more than this moment. At some point, we mentioned the cafe, the midnight coffee, the walks, the bench. Not to relive them, not to romanticize them, but to remember. "Do you remember?" she said. "The leaf that landed at your foot that night?" I smiled. "Yeah. I kicked it too many times." She laughed softly, and it felt like a bell that had finally found its tone. No dramatics, no urgency. Just recognition. We'd been here before, in tension and longing, and now we were here again, in quiet company. We finished our drinks. I watched her rise, stretch, and tuck a stray hair behind her ear. "See you later?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. A soft affirmation, nothing more, nothing less. Enough. As she walked away, I thought of all the moments we'd paused, all the words left unsaid, all the small gestures that meant more than they appeared. And for the first time, it felt whole, not because of a grand declaration, but because of the quiet, patient way we had found each other. I picked up the bench, cold coffee in hand, and let the sun warm my face. The world carried on, and we did too, together somehow, without needing more than what we already had. And I thought, maybe love isn't a story told in fireworks or lines shouted into the night. Maybe it's a series of quiet moments, understood only by those who live them. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?